Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're putting on our detective hats. Our mission? We're tracking down literally every single leak point on a facility. We have to do this to build a flawless, ironclad hazardous area map. So if you've ever stared at the sheer complexity of an offshore deck or a massive process plant and thought, how on earth am I supposed to classify all of this without losing my mind? Well, you're in the exact right place. Let's just dive right into it.
Here's our roadmap for mastering the first half of the point source method. We'll start with a hunt for leak points, outline the four-step method, and then break down the 3 grades of release. After that, we're going to map those grades directly to specific zones, uncover a seriously dangerous maintenance trap, and finish up with a quick knowledge check. Basically, this is how we take the total chaos of an offshore deck and organize it into a crystal clear set of safety zones.
All right, Section 1, the hunt for leak points, leaving absolutely no stone unturned. Let's establish exactly what it is we're looking for when we start staring at those massive process diagrams.
Because before you can classify even a single square meter of deck, you've got to hunt down every single point that could ever leak. I mean, every seal, every flange, every vent. Why so strict? Well, missing just one of these means you've drawn a zone map with a giant, invisible, and frankly dangerous hole in it. You simply can't protect against a hazard if you haven't identified it on your P&IDs first.
And here is the official definition, straight from international standards, like IEC 6007-90-10. A source of release is basically any point or location from which a flammable gas, vapor, or liquid might escape into the atmosphere in a way that an explosive gas atmosphere could actually form. So, practically speaking, this means systematically tracing through your piping and instrumentation diagrams and looking for every single potential escape route. We're talking everything from pump seals all the way down to tiny sample points or drainage valves.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 4-step method, our area classification blueprint. To tackle this massive investigative task without getting entirely overwhelmed, we use a really structured approach known as the point source method.
It's a clean 4-step process. Step 1, identify the point sources. Step 2, determine the grade of release. Step 3, evaluate the ventilation. And Step 4, establish the zone and extent. Now, for today's explainer, we are strictly focusing on locking in Steps 1 and 2, finding those potential release points on your flow diagrams, and then assigning them a release grade. We'll tackle the whole ventilation and extent side of things next time.
Okay, Section 3, 3 grades of release, categorizing the culprits. Because once you actually find a leak point, you can't just treat them all exactly the same. You've got to sort its behavior into one of 3 distinct grades, based on how often it's throwing out flammable material.
What's really interesting here is how we break down the severity. These 3 grades represent the decreasing likelihood of an explosive gas atmosphere actually being present during normal operations. First up is continuous, which means it might be releasing for over 1,000 hours a year. Then you have primary, sitting somewhere between 10 and 1,000 hours. And finally secondary, which is super rare, generally happening for less than 10 hours an entire year. Let's look a bit closer at each one.
First, the continuous grade. The standard defines this as a release which is continuous or is expected to occur for long periods. I like to think of this as your guaranteed, always-on release. A classic example would be the open fluid surface inside an atmospheric storage tank, or maybe a vent that's just permanently open to the atmosphere, continuously letting out vapor.
Next up is the primary grade. This covers releases which can be expected to occur periodically or occasionally during normal operation. And normal operation is the absolute key phrase there. We're talking about expected routine releases, like an active pump seal that actually relies on the fluid itself for lubrication, routine water drainage from a vessel, or a designated sample point that operators have to use regularly.
Finally, we have the secondary grade. This is a release which is not expected to occur in normal operation, and if it does, it's infrequent and brief. So, secondary grade is really reserved for those unexpected, rare leaks that happen during abnormal events. Think of a sudden flange leak, a pump seal totally failing, or an accidental spill. It's definitely not supposed to happen, but, it might.
Section 4, mapping grades to zones, the direct link. Now that we understand exactly how a leak behaves, we can connect it directly to the hazardous area zone classification. Honestly, this is where the magic happens.
The fundamental rule here ties the grade directly to the zone. Check this out. A continuous grade source normally drives a Zone 0 classification around it. A primary grade source drives Zone 1, and a secondary grade source drives Zone 2.
It really is that straightforward. If you grade the source correctly, the zone almost writes itself.
Now, if you're having any trouble visualizing this, just think of a normal garden hose at your house. The open tap end, which is always running water when it's on, that's your continuous grade. The screw connector attaching the hose to the tap, the one that weeps just a little bit occasionally every time you use it, that's primary. And a random puncture from, say, accidentally stepping on the hose, which is rare and definitely unexpected, that's secondary. It's the exact same hose, just 3 completely different leak behaviors.
And this really brilliantly illustrates how those exact same principles apply out in industrial environments. Looking at these vent lines, you can easily see how a continuous vent, one that's expected to release for long periods, drives a severe Zone 0 classification inside the pipe and a Zone 1 area immediately outside it. Conversely, an occasional vent, representing a non-continuous release, only drives Zone 1 inside and Zone 2 outside. So the grade entirely dictates the severity of the zones right around it.
Which brings us to Section 5, the maintenance trap, paper versus reality. Let's address a really critical real-world twist where I see so many new engineers completely slip up when they start applying these international standards.
Remember just a minute ago when we said a flange is graded secondary? Well, it's graded secondary specifically because a properly maintained, correctly torqued flange is not expected to leak in normal operation. But, and this is a massive but, that entire classification assumes your inspection and maintenance program is actually running. If you neglect your flange program, your plant's reality is going to violently drift away from your paper zone map. The map stops matching the plant, and suddenly, boom, you have a primary continuous hazard sitting in an area that's only equipped for a rare secondary hazard. It's a huge trap.
All right, Section 6, Knowledge Check, Applying the Framework. Let's put your brand new investigative skills to the test with a really quick pop quiz on plant operations. Let's see if you can apply what we just covered.
Here's the scenario. A process sample point is opened by an operator 3 times per shift. What release grade is this? Think about the frequency and think about the intention here. An operator is opening this point multiple times a shift as part of their normal, everyday routine duties.
Well, if you guessed primary grade, you absolutely nailed it. That is a primary grade because it's a routine, fully expected release happening during normal operations. It's not continuously venting all day, but it's certainly not a rare abnormal accident either. And based on our mapping rule from earlier, this naturally points you toward drawing a Zone 1 envelope right around that specific sample point.
So look at that. You have now successfully locked in the first 2 steps of the point source method. You know exactly how to find your sources, and you know how to grade them as either continuous, primary, or secondary. That right there is a massive part of the battle won.
But grading alone doesn't actually finish the job. Because think about it. A primary release out on an open deck with really strong ocean winds is going to behave completely differently from that exact same release inside a sealed, stagnant compressor room, right? Ventilation changes everything about how big that zone actually gets in the real world. So how do we calculate exactly how much that matters, and when does a simple grease literally save your facility from disaster? That is exactly what we're going to calculate in our next explainer. Until then, keep your P&IDs close and make sure those maintenance programs are actually running.